I tried to be careful,
I'm gonna be real with you, Chief. I really lost all faith.
to stay out of the controversy of the flying man in the cape.
So I'm coming into this acknowledging to you that I'm already a fan of his work.
But I couldn't run forever.
So sit back, relax, pour a beverage.
Time to face the elephant in the room.
Some of the most retarded things I've ever heard.
So here's my review
Let's celebrate!
of Heroic Tales. Alright, let's get to it. This is my review of Heroic Tales. This book was created by John Boa, who has the show John's Long Box. He made his entrance onto the scene, showing off his impressive comic book collection and how much he knows about the classics. It's a great show to watch. I highly recommend it. This book was advertised as a love letter to the classics, so naturally, I had to check it out. This review will follow my usual categories of visuals, action, dialogue, and story. Let's talk visuals. These three panels, I think, sum up the visuals pretty well, at least regarding how they relate to the classics. As you can see, it's not exactly like a classic comic book, but it is an obvious nod to a classic comic book. At the same time, it's something unique that could take place today. John really did have a great team of artists working on these panels. They're quality and fun to look at. Now, with that being the case, I do have one complaint. I think at times the panels are tonally inconsistent. Here's an example of what I mean. Here we have a classic robbery and the hero is saving the day. Now you have some scantily clad women accompanying the bad guy, which has happened in many books and media, especially of that era. The dresses of that era, all that is perfectly consistent with the story and the tone. But given the way modern artists draw and the hyperrealism, I think given this shot and where the focus is on the panel, I think there is a little emphasis on the booty, which is not necessarily wrong, but I think it is inconsistent with the tone that this is a classic comic book that back in the 70s and 80s would have been geared toward a younger audience. Clearly, this is for an older audience that is a bit nostalgic. Here's another one that I think is inconsistent with the tone. I understand why this is happening. There's a guy who has to provide for his family, and that's really at the core of who this character is. But at the same time, we're watching a superhero break a deer's neck, and that just seems odd. I think it's off with the tone. Here's another one that I think in tone is just inconsistent with the rest of the book. I understand why this is happening. This is meat to provide for the family, and there's father and son bonding going on. But what they're doing while they're bonding is just weird. And does the audience really need to see this? It just seems a little off. This is normally something you would see a villain doing. I understand that they live in rural America, but it's just not necessary for the audience to see, to communicate what's going on and who this family is, unless you're trying to communicate something else that I'm not getting. Compare that to these panels, which I think are more consistent with the overall tone of the book, and it's hard to believe that they exist in the same book. They don't seem like they belong together. Now let's get to the action. These action panels are top notch, and like the overall tone of the book, they're classic but also new. Look at this panel. It's a giant bug robot monster thing tearing through a city as a superhero flies around. Now look at this. The action ramps up and things are getting crazy. Now, as you may notice, there are a lot of words on these panels, even during action scenes. This is something I initially didn't like, but I've noticed is pretty common in comic books, and it's something I've had my mind changed on. As you'll notice in Call Sign Orion, my book coming out soon, there aren't a lot of words on my action panels, and that's because of an opinion I share with the editor, Mike Barron, that nobody talks when they fight. Since we both like to envelop the reader in a sense of realism, that's what we go for in all the action and dialogue scenes. Something I've learned is that preference comes from about the mid 80s when comic books shifted to a more cinematic style that emphasized realism. Prior to that, comic books were basically theatrical, just like old movies. Another argument I've heard is that a comic book panel isn't a snapshot like one frame of a movie. It's really a communication about a certain moment in time. And from that perspective, a lot of words during a fight scene doesn't entirely make sense, but if it's theatrical and it's several moments that you could consider freeze frame condensed into one panel, it does make sense. Now let's talk about those words on the page. One thing I appreciate about this dialogue is that each character has their own voice. I think that's huge in terms of keeping the reader invested in the story and not pulled out of their suspended disbelief. I also like how the dialogue is consistent with classic comic books that takes you back to a more wholesome America. I'm sorry, is this kid going to be Dexter Morgan? Now, time for my favorite part of any book, the story. Ultimately, this story is about a classic hero who's just trying to do the right thing. I also like that this story takes place in a rich universe that's already built up. You get little hints of it here and there, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it. Also, it's nice knowing that this whole universe was built over many years of John's tabletop gaming, which is just a sign that he's a straight up nerd. Part of the reason I look forward to more stories from this universe is the fact that they're being made by someone who has a great appreciation for the genre. Overall, the first Heroic Tales book was highly entertaining, and I recommend it to anyone. And that's all I've got to say about that. Now go out there, enjoy good stories, touch grass, and let me know what you think in the comments. Want to see more content? Stay tuned for more. Subscribe, like, you know what to do.